Hey, Sarah, are you there? Hi, Sarah.
Hi, how's it going?
Good, thanks. How are you?
Good.
Whereabouts are you joining us from?
I'm in Oregon, in a little town called Vernonia. We have a farm out here. So it's a great place to isolate.
Yeah, lovely.
Hey, Dave, how you doing?
I have a colleague based in Portland. We've just did an office up there. Hello, David M. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Very, very good. I've got Sarah online as well. Sarah, Dave
Hi.
is from the programming board as well.
Hi, Sarah.
How you doing?
I'm good. Good. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, my pleasure.
While we're waiting for the others, Sarah, did you have any questions about how the event's going to play out?
No, I reviewed your info and all the questions. There's some good questions there. I've got that all pulled up, so I think I'm ready to go.
Cool. And am I right in understanding you're equally across the general entrepreneurship stuff and the specific fundraising stuff?
I focus very, very much on capital, access to capital, largely at the seed stage, and working with founders who have not traditionally had access to capital. So that's kind of my expertise. My background's finance and technology.
Okay, great. So I might, for the fundraising questions, I'll alternate between, we might natural flow, but just between you and Stefan in terms of starting things, like starting off each question, and you each chime in. Peter will have stuff to say as well. And then obviously where relevant, I might let Peter lead on some of the more general entrepreneurship stuff, but if you have stuff to add, feel free to chime in after as well.
Sure, yeah, great.
Where are you based, Sarah?
I'm in Vernonia, which is this tiny little logging town about 45 minutes west of Portland in Oregon. Yeah.
Do you work much with SVB out there? The Jane Oman and her team? Silicon Valley Bank?
So I'm connected to you originally through Nancy with Endo Industries. I'm mentoring her. And I just actually today did a 2-hour workshop with your current cohort at the Growth Lab on fundraising in a startup, having got connected with Chris Davidson.
Got it. Well, thanks for doing that. Very, very interesting stuff there.
Yeah, my pleasure. I love that part of the work, the teaching piece, and it's always a pleasure.
Oh.
So I work So I work closely with Chris in my day job. He's one of the entrepreneur residents at the program that I run for Australian companies. So we work very closely together.
Yeah, that's great. Australian, huh? I'm British.
Hey, Stefan.
Take me for that all the time.
Hello.
Well, I'm glad to see that nobody else listened to the new rage on Twitter or Instagram or whatever it is. You know, the Zoom room reviews, like all these people putting all this thought into their like backgrounds. I'm like, oh, geez,
okay.
No points, nil point.
I think it gets old, especially if you have a white, wall to
I have an orchid. I should go get it. Like strategically place it in the background.
They also just look so glitchy too, right? So it's
it is trippy when you have kids running around and they're like their arm is in and out of it.
Mine's being very glitchy now. How's it from your end?
Yeah, it's a little glitchy. I never can tell if it's me because I have mildly unreliable internet at the farm. So I'm glad it's not my fault. But if anything does happen and I disappear, that's what's happening. And I'll try and get back on as soon as I can. Yeah, we have satellite internet. So it's just like, you'd think that would be more reliable, not less, but.
Getting in the way.
Well, I'm in downtown San Francisco and my internet's very patchy at the moment. Everyone's cutting in and out. So we're in a better situation.
Happy hour. That's why.
Mine is just always patchy. I'm also in downtown SF. It's just nonstop.
Yeah, I think SF is sort of notorious for having bad internet. It's of course ironic.
Hey, Seth.
Hey, sorry about that.
That's all good. So I think we're just waiting for Peter. I think he said he'd be joining about now, so that's that right. So Stefan, any final questions before we kick off? Are you all clear on things?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Is anyone on from StartOut behind that StartOut account? Because I do have a question about.
Yeah. Hi everyone. This is Sara.
Hey Sara. Do you let the attendees in on the hour, or do we have to do that? Or does it
I do it as the host. I can broadcast, so I was kind of waiting at least for Peter to join. And if it's okay with you, you can tell me whenever you want that to happen, and I'll do it on my hand. And then I'll mute myself and let you run the show.
Okay, perfect. And I just want to test that you can all see my slides when I present. So is that working for all? Can you see the StartOut slide?
Yep.
Yep. All right. Cool.
Hi, monkey.
All right. We can leave that up.
Jaxie.
So Dave, just to be clear, I'm monitoring the chat box basically. And
yeah, good question. So the terminology is, let me stop sharing so I can see the controls again. So you're on the chat section, which will be just comments and links and discussion. Dave, you're on the Q&A session, which will be the Q&A section, which will be for questions to put to the panel. Yeah, again, Seth, at the end of each session on COVID, entrepreneurship and fundraising, I'll just ask you if there's anything interesting on the discussion on the chat to add. If not, no worries. And then Dave, every couple of questions, I'll throw to you to pick the best one of the crop that's most relevant to the flow, if that's cool.
Yeah, so just still have that question via the chat. The people will be submitting via the chat, and then I'll just kind of run through that and select the best one.
Yeah, and I'm going to make it clear that if I probably won't get to all the questions. I don't think we'll get to even all the questions on the list. So is to promote, the StartOut mentoring and expert service, so they can always come back in and do that if they sign up to StartOut and do it in one-on-one.
Just to be clear, am I monitoring chat and Dave is monitoring Q&A because it's like separate buckets, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Separate buckets, but same forum, right? Sorry to confuse. I just see kind of with the Zoom chat, that's where the questions will be asked, correct? Or
no, I think they're two different fields. They're two different fields. So if someone wants to submit a question, they need to click on Q&A and it'll pop up in a different window than the discussion, the chat. Because I think the Q&A comes to us as presenters, whereas the chat is to the audience as a whole.
Perfect. So I've only been on panels. I've never moderated the Q&A. So where would you find that in the list of subheadings like chat, webinar settings?
If you click on Q&A, it should open up the box.
You'll see it down at the bottom of the screen.
Yeah.
I see it at the top because I'm on mobile.
Oh.
There we go. Perfect.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's where the Q&A will come through. Good. Still no Peter. That's all right.
This is an endless source of confusion in every Zoom I've ever been in as to where you post what. Zoom might need to clean that up a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I know that like WebEx is the one I use mostly, and it's all combined, just the chat. You can choose to who you send it to rather than just having the separate fields.
That's why no one ever answers my questions.
Maybe that's why.
That's not the reason why.
I just thought they sucked.
Terrible questions.
Better question.
Like I thought that was a good one. I thought this was a safe space, guys. Like no stupid questions, right?
Some stupid questions.
They're all stupid.
Trust me, I've had.
Hey, Sarah.
Yeah.
Sarah from StartOut. Peter, the link Peter has isn't for this meeting because he's in a meeting by himself. So can you send him another invite or add him in to this meeting? He just sent me an email.
He can use any of I can send it to him again, but he could use yours as well if you want to.
Okay.
Use any of the panelists, but I can send it to him again.
Okay, either or, but I just thought it was all individual, but if the panelists is all the same, then I can easily forward it to him.
Anything else we can be helpful with, Dave, before we launch into it?
I don't think so. We'll see how we go. I mean,
okay.
Should be all good. I mean, does what are if it's going well, we're getting lots of questions. What are the thoughts about going over time a little? Is anyone on a hard stop, or
no? I'm
if
good.
you run over 10 minutes or so, would any problem? Okay.
Yeah, happy to extend this. I'm free to help out.
Yeah, I don't have anything immediately after either. So good.
All right. Well,
as long as it's not 24 hours.
No,
I have done that. It's brutal.
We'll try and keep it a bit prompt. I mean, the purpose is that they can always reach out to StartOut and engage in other ways. So.
Yeah. Also, another way to do it, sometimes if there's a ton of questions that haven't been answered, you can do the same thing you did with the questions coming in, drop them into categories, and we can provide written answers or.
Yeah, I'm hesitant to offer that because I know it can be a lot of work. I just did it with a big webinar, but we had 460 participants on it or something. So
yeah, we'll see how much it is.
Yeah.
There we go.
Sorry. You know me, even when I don't have to walk more than 10 feet, still cut it a little close. Sorry for that. I couldn't get my computer to work.
Hey, Peter, you're identifying as Sarah now, so that's perfect.
Oh, great.
Okay, well, then I will speak with the French accent.
You can change it, Peter, by the way. You can rename yourself.
Let me do that. Let me find that.
So if it's okay with everyone, I'll start broadcasting and people can enter the room. Good?
Sure.
Yep. I'm just looking where I changed my name.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I can see some participants filing into the room, so that's great. Thanks for joining us this evening. We'll just give people 30 seconds to log in, and then we'll start with some introductory remarks and kick off the session in full in about 10 minutes, but there's some stuff to go through beforehand. So welcome to today's webinar. Thanks for joining us, and we'll commence very shortly.
David, Peter is asking if he said, should we raise our hand when we want to speak, or will you just call all on us? And I'll ask, also throw in, do you want us all on video, or just you and Peter, or how do you want appearing?
Let's keep the panelists on video. If you guys want to deactivate, that's fine. Because we will stop the slides once the Q&A gets underway. And I'll invite panelists to answer the question, or we can, whoever wants to chime in can put their hand up. But for the audience, thanks for joining us again. I think we'll start off with some introductory remarks. You should all be able to see my screen. Seth, can you see the Slido screen up there?
Yeah.
Great. So for the audience, if you could all please go to slido.com on your mobile device or web browser and enter the hashtag StartOut. We've just got three quick polls to do to gauge who we've got in the audience and what stage their businesses are at. It's all anonymous. You don't have to log in with any private details, and there'll be no way for us to work out who's saying what. So it's an honesty system, and your information will be private. But the first poll is at what stage is your business at? Are you pre-revenue, revenue generating, or not applicable? You're just here for the community day. So that's great. Thank you for getting onto that promptly. As I said, there'll just be three quick polls. And obviously panelists are saying a good chunk of pre-revenue companies and a few revenue generating. So early stage companies today, which is fine. If there are any final people who want to answer, feel free to do so. We'll move on to the next poll in 20 seconds or so. All right, great. Next poll you should see is how much money have you raised from external investors to date? Nothing. $1 to 500,000, 500,000 to $1 million, $1 million. All right, awesome. I think we'll see that trend continuing. Early stage, no money raised, a few people raised, up to 500,000. No one trickling above that early seed stage, pre-seed stage at the moment. All right, awesome. Thank you for that. And the final question, are you looking to raise in the next 6 months, 6 to 12 months, 12 months or more, or no plans to raise at the moment?
Wow.
All right, great. So plenty of people looking to raise in the next 6 to 12. You're in the right place to get some good tips and answer your questions. And we're obviously in a pretty interesting time at the moment as well. So thank you very much for that. That gives the panelists a good idea of where the audience is at. So I'm just going to stop that and put back up our slides. And just do some introductory remarks. So obviously, thank you very much for joining. This session's being run by StartOut San Francisco chapter, and it's a pleasure to be bringing together some great StartOut experts to help you answer some Q&A around fundraising and entrepreneurship in general at this interesting time. So just some introductory comments, obviously, about StartOut. Most of you will be aware, but I did just want to touch on 2 items of the resources that are relevant today. So obviously, StartOut Experts is a program that StartOut has made available whereby experts are available to answer your questions one-on-one. So if you're a StartOut member, you can apply to speak to the experts on the call today one-on-one and go through your needs on an individual basis. And the next one I want to raise was the forum. So the StartOut forum is online on mobile and on desktop, and it's a place for you to ask the questions that maybe you don't know who to ask those questions to. So it's a community forum where you can get some good insights and feedback from people just like you and connect with the community. You'll also see that there are 2 events in that forum for this AMA event and also next week's AMA event, where you can leave lasting comments, resources, and anything you have for the community. My name's David Brown, and I am the co-chair of the programming board here in San Francisco. And I wanted to introduce to you well, first of all, obviously, just to mention for our sponsors, StartOut relies on the generosity of all these sponsors to be able to provide these types of services to you. So we always like to thank them as we go. And we'd also like to welcome our panelists for this evening. We have a great panel with lots of expertise. Starting off with Stefan Arteaga, who is a fundraising advisor at StartOut and an investor who is passionate about the startup ecosystem and founder success. Stefan led the intellectual property strategy for a startup that was acquired by a large strategic and has made investments across multiple industries, including LegalTech, PropTech, medical devices, HealthTech, mobility, cannabis, and artificial intelligence and ML. Welcome, Stefan, and thanks so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you.
Next, we have Sara Batterby, who is a startup veteran with 20 years of experience founding and funding companies and honing her expertise in finance at the early stage capital. As a founder of the Equity Capital Collective, Sara supports founders with their first fundraisings and has helped close over $60 million in funding so far. So welcome, Sara. It's great to have you with us.
Thank you.
And finally, we have Peter Sisson. Peter is a product-focused entrepreneur who has started 4 companies, all of which have been acquired. He's now working on his 5th, called Yazza. I hope I pronounced that properly. Peter is a longtime StartOut mentor and was the founding EIR of the StartOut Growth Lab, where during his tenure, he graduated 24 companies that together have closed more than $45 million in funding and created 200 new jobs. So welcome, Peter, and thank you also for joining us tonight. Also joining us from the programming board is David Mullen and Seth Gilmour. David will be monitoring the Q&A section on the Zoom, and that's an area where you can add questions as we go. We do have a lot of questions that were submitted on registration, which we'll get to as well, but every so often we'll pause for the live Q&A, where you can use that section to put in your question, and David will pick some to add in as we go. Seth will be monitoring the discussion board, which is the chat section of Zoom. And that's a place for you to comment as things go on, and post, any relevant resources that you want to share, links, or any other information that is relevant to the discussion as we go. So again, the chat icon, the Q&A icon for questions, and the chat icon for discussion. All right, so without further ado, I wanted to stop sharing my screen so we can see the videos again, and we can dive into the first questions, which are around COVID. So obviously we had a lot of questions on registration about the current state of affairs. And the first question we'd like to address, the elephant in the room, is how do you think COVID-19 will impact startup fundraising? So we might kick off with Sara.
Yeah, thanks. So this was a total unknown. You think all the experience in the world would give you a really good sense of what would happen. I sort of haven't known what would happen. What I saw happen initially was just a total dead zone. It lasted for about 3 to 4 weeks. And then what I saw and have been sort of increasingly pleased about is a relatively quick sort of settling of investors, outgoing requests for continued delivery into their pipelines, and requests to receive good offerings that they can review. I think a lot of people are sitting at home and, they're like, okay, like we got over the shock and it's like back to business as normal. So I think the capital's coming in, obviously seed funds that have already raised funds, they're in the business of deploying that capital, and that won't change. I think the next interesting question is, are the funds going to have a hard time raising their next round after they've deployed? I think that could have a somewhat limiting effect on the next sort of phase of capital in the fund category. Angel investors, that's a challenge. Those guys are individually impacted. They are listening to the advice of their financial advisors, who are telling them to be more conservative. They're watching the value of their online portfolios, which are, the bulk of their wealth, and the margin for sort of high risk investing is probably significantly decreased. And so I think that there's a shift. And for those, so if I was targeting angel investors, I would be looking towards more sophisticated angel investors rather than the hobbyists who sort of understand the opportunities embedded and have the ability and the expertise to qualify deals that are a good fit for this time of investing, rather than angel investors who are just sort of folks who do it more on a sort of hobby basis and for the social piece, who right now I think are going to feel anxious about investing without the domain expertise or the relevant expertise to make really good decisions right now.
That's great. I can add to what Sara said, because I just got out of some meetings on Monday with some investors. So everything she said, I agree with. On top of that, in talking to a couple VCs, they said March was hell, and they weren't looking at any new deals. They were triaging. They were just trying to figure out who to save and who to not save in their portfolio. And then everything kind of got squared away April, and what, at least anecdotally, I'm hearing is now they kind of cleaned up their existing portfolios, got things locked down, and now they're ready to start looking again. So that was encouraging. The other thing I heard is there's just a lot of liquidity out there, a lot of capital. People pulled out of the markets in January, and although many are waiting to pounce back in on lows, some of them just have a lot of cash right now. So, but also Sarah's absolutely, the angels are the ones it really depends on a case-by-case basis. If they time their pull out of the market and they're liquid right now, they might be super eager, but they screwed that up, they're not in a good mood.
Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. Stefan, anything to add on that one? You're on mute.
Oh, you're muted.
Thanks. Yeah, no, I really agree with the sentiments that both Sarah and Peter shared. I think, yeah, the main point, especially because of the audience we have, angel investors, you really have to work harder to identify which ones are going to have liquidity and sort of look at the ones that are maybe a little bit more professionalized, almost angel networks, perhaps, rather than individual angels.
Yeah, perfect. So maybe we'll stick with you for the next question. And do you think that the average investor, and we can focus on those early stage investors again, will start to look more at some proven metrics and success before investing? Are they being a bit more cautious? So therefore putting companies that are, just have an idea and a spark, but no traction at a disadvantage? Or do you think the metrics will still be the same, it'll just be rarer, to find that money?
I think that my underlying assumption has been that they're going to be a little bit more cautious. They have more optionality in a way or my thesis has been that they will have more optionality because there will be more companies that are looking to raise, I think, given the unemployment situation, unfortunately, at an early stage. And so they're going to be looking for more metric-driven decisions where you, I think, can demonstrate you've achieved more with less money, or that the valuation isn't over the top. I think that there's going to be a compression on valuations, so more conservative valuations are for priced rounds.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that if you've got something that's like a really great new idea, you might still be able to raise, but it sort of depends on what your network is, I think. And also what kind of unique insights are you bringing to this particular new situation that we exist in? What has COVID changed or accelerated for the long run that you have a unique insight and opportunity to take that an investor would get excited about? So,
yeah.
Great. So next question is, once someone's, prepared a deck, what would be the next step for them to think about in this current global crisis that might have been different from before, in terms of approaching investors and expressing what the investors might want to see? How do you see that changed in recent times?
I can jump in. I mean, it really depends, I guess. What I think is probably going to happen is, sorry. That one just flew out my ear. I don't know, someone knocked on the door. And I was trying to stall long enough to remember the question, and then so I'm sorry. I had something brilliant, but I forgot. It wasn't that brilliant, obviously.
Briefly, I just want to create sort of a counterpoint to the previous question. Is that allowed?
Yep.
Yeah.
So I do think that I agree with everything that Stefan said with regards to sort of appetite, valuation, all the rest of it. I also think that smart investors realize that what COVID has done is it sort of surfaced some really systemic challenges in things like our supply chain, our food supply chain, our sort of relationship with China, India for a majority of our supply chain around manufacturing. And I think that they're on the lookout for, there's definitely a new market opportunity. So if you are addressing something that's contextualized by the problems that have been highlighted by COVID, and you have a super coherent plan, and you have a track record of execution coming in from other accomplishments or your previous career that demonstrate that you are competent, capable, and you've put together a really coherent and robust offering, I think there is an opportunity to come out of the gate not on the back of a napkin, but with something brand new and be an exciting opportunity for investors. I also think that there is a sort of tactical pivot strategy that is very relevant for companies that are approaching a raise or in the midst of a raise with COVID. And what I've been doing with my community of founders is basically like breaking raises in half, just going into like a two-step where you can pull down your raise amount to give you sort of a functional, operational, sort of slow progress pathway for maybe 3 to 6 months, and do that at a 30% discount on your marketed valuation cap. So, and be very, very explicit about your use of funds, and you need to be at least far enough along in the timeline that you can demonstrate that there will be value creation from any money that is raised. But if you can do that and then go back to the relationships that you've already created with interested investors and say to them, listen, this is the plan, this is what I've done, like be proactive about pulling down your own valuation and offering a sort of coherent plan to stabilize and keep the company stable, continue growth, and then build value, and then you'll claw back that discount in your valuation when you reposition yourself to raise the remainder of your round or close down and start a new raise once we're through the craziness. And you'll get a better chance of pulling in the funds that you need to sort of continue the growth trajectory that you're currently on over the next 6 months. And I think that's an appropriate solution, and also gives you an opportunity to create some urgency by saying, this opportunity is only available to funds that I can call in the next 30 days. And so by creating that like hard deadline, you can create some urgency and opportunity and signal that, you've got things under control. With regards to build a deck and what do I do with it, the actual question, I think what you do with it is, the first thing you've got to acknowledge is that, what I would do with a deck is like absolutely nothing, frankly. Like what I would do is try to meet investors, find sort of my people who are interested in my company. That's not going to happen to you in a presentation mode. That's going to happen to you in a relationship where you have an opportunity to really give an investor the insight into what you're doing, your competency managing your company. You have to really pull back the veil and give them an opportunity to understand the opportunities and challenges that you're facing. So ditch the presentation style and don't be sending your deck out to people over email. It's not an effective way to fundraise. What I would do is look at who's around you, the connectors, the investors, and the advocates, your advisors, previous investors from seed stage. Bring those people together in a group, a tight group, and sort of establish a network effect within that group by giving those people insight, informing them, positioning yourself as a sort of leader and an expert through this situation, and onwards, continuing to sort of reinforce and validate using external validation your offering as it relates to the market opportunity, and then build this cohort, right? You need a team. You need to like replicate what happens in these natural capital networks where people raise money off the back of napkins. It needs to be done in that way. It'll massively increase your efficiency in the process. And a lot of the fundraising work, if you do a good job with the communications within this small group, a lot of the fundraising will actually be done through the network effect with people who already know and trust you. So I would focus your energy on relationships that are already close at hand and develop those relationships and go to those people and make them your fundraising team.
And I'm going to, just for fun, add a little bit of a counterpoint. I think you're absolutely right. But actually, I want to start with a question that ties into the metrics. Are you looking as an investor now, depending on the phase of the company, the first thing you kind of, I'm in the app business, so you want to get engagement, and then you really want to prove the engagement and retention before you're growing. And I'm wondering, with lack of capital for growth, is engagement, are those type of metrics going to be weighted more heavily, or you're going to be just even more strict about looking for growth and revenue?
Well, I guess I'll respond. It it really sort of depends on what stage of investor you are, but also what kind of deals you start seeing at that stage. And 6 months ago or so, probably engagement would have been good. I still like to, when I speak with founders, I like to say that your traction doesn't have to be revenue. It can be what you've achieved so far, right? But to also remember, just because you get a no from an investor doesn't mean that you're doing something wrong or that you're a bad investment to make, but they have better opportunities. And that's sort of what I mean by the metrics are gonna be led by the type of opportunities that investors can get in on in a way. And so the deal flow that they see and you're competing not just against your industry or vertical competitors, but against all other startups that investors are seeing in that price range, for example, within the space that they're interested in. So
now, are you guys seeing an increase in M&A? Because the other thing I heard is that companies are now looking around to pick up startups on the cheap.
I'm seeing a lot of that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially in the sort of more nascent industries, cannabis, hemp, there's a lot of market consolidation and aggregation going on, which has been, somewhat of a function of just the emerging market dynamics within those industries. But it seems intuitive to me that there's a very opportunistic environment out there around M&A right now.
Yeah, I thought so. So I forgot to mention the counterpoint. The counterpoint was there's only one positive of this in terms of meeting new people is everybody's trapped at home and people are more reachable than ever. I mean, I'm getting email responses from VCs that would normally take 2 weeks. And so there is that. Doesn't mean they're necessarily investing, but at least they're answering emails.
My email inbox is empty for the first time in my life, probably.
There you go.
Yeah. So, and that really speaks to the importance of like targeted outreach and how to do that really, really well. And with targeted outreach, you can do this for either advisors that are really sort of A-game advisors. It's not just, I think what I always tell founders is just stop thinking about investors. Like, to be successful raising money, it's not about meeting investors, finding investors. It's about gathering a community of people around your company who do a variety of things. Connectors are critical in a raise. Advocates, signal advisors are critical in a raise to add credibility to your offering. There's a lot that you can do that is not about meeting new investors. If you do a cold outreach via LinkedIn to someone who you've researched and can provide a compelling case for why they should take a look at an opportunity to be an equity compensated advisor for your company, that would, remember, if you bring in an advisor, you're opening up their network of investors. So it's a lot easier to ask people for advice and expertise than it is to ask people for money. Effective fundraising usually doesn't involve asking for money, period. And so it's just really good to start thinking about what does it mean to build a fundraising team in your company? And it really is a broad sweep of your team, their network, your advisors team, your past investors team, their network, and think about the people outside of your network who are sort of targets for you. And yeah, now might actually be a really advantageous time to drop them an email, but just be really respectful and don't, just be sure and let people know that you're looking to enter into a transactional relationship where there's a reciprocal exchange of value. So be explicit about equity compensation for advisory roles and other similar type participation.
Yeah, I think that was all great advice. You guys are doing a great job at preempting the questions coming on the chat too. So we'll turn to that because this is intended to be a live event. So please do ask questions as we go along, again in the Q&A section on the Zoom controls there. They're having
if questions come up on the Q&A, or is that moderated for us?
We'll moderate it in a second. So there've been a bunch of questions come through about targeting investors, and we'll get to that in the fundraising proper section a little bit later. So I might just throw over to David M to see what else has come through on the chat that might be relevant to just close out the COVID section.
Yep, and to Dave's point, a few of these questions we'll answer later on in the presentation, but this one specifically is for Sara. So you mentioned making genuine connections before sharing a deck. How are you seeing this change or suggesting founders do this with the limitations around how we're socializing in the pandemic?
Mm-hmm.
And specifically for online pitches, which are very different than making connections in in-person events, how would you advise going about doing this?
Okay, so I'm going to be super tactical about this. And what I would say is that this is the normal conversation. Let's say you do an online pitch, either to an individual investor or you're pitching. Now we're seeing a lot of these pitch events going online. The goal is that people will have the opportunity to follow up, and the sort of digital version of, oh, I think you're great. I love, it sounds interesting. Send me your stuff, right? So what I do in response to those kind of conversations is I say to people, yeah, I'd be delighted to, you know, I'm in the process of preparing to open a raise, or I have a due diligence process open. What I'd really like to do is spend like 20 minutes, jump on a call, jump on a Zoom call, and just have an opportunity to share a little bit more about the business and get to know you a little bit. If it seems like we're a fit, I would love to invite you into my process. That is a huge shift from sending your stuff out over the internet and having no visibility into where it goes. If they open it, if they don't like it, don't pass it on to somebody else, but then get distracted and go away, and they've passed it on to people, but now you've lost the quality of those ongoing connections. So it's really critical that as a fundraising founder, you design and lead the process of your fundraising. Otherwise, you're waiting for people to get back to you. It's anxiety provoking, and frankly, it's kind of soul destroying. That second email, hey, did you get a chance to look at my stuff? You know?
Yep.
Yep.
Totally sucks. You never ever should write that email. It sucks, and it doesn't reflect who you are. It's going to be difficult and anxiety provoking for you. So you have to reverse that dynamic and set up a framework where it's like, hey, you know, another thing is when you send out your stuff, what you've done is you've created this huge barrier to entry for any ongoing conversation, because if they don't look at your deck or have a bunch of questions for you, you've made that a sort of dependency for any ongoing relationship building. So don't ask these people to do anything. Have a conversation with them and say, I'm going to give you access to the information and I'm going to keep you updated. And you can do that in a way that doesn't require them to do anything. Remember, most seed stage investors do not do due diligence. So asking them to do due diligence is a prerequisite to have a relationship with them. You're canceling out 87% of them right away. So don't do that. Let them do what they want to do. They're grown-ups, let them do their thing. But just make sure that you have sort of garnered the permission to update, to have access to your information and to update them on your progress. And by doing that, you can then execute a communication strategy that builds engagement, like softens, you know, ambivalence, that earns trust and all of this stuff down the road. And then you can convert someone who's like interested, ambivalent, busy, into someone who's really tuning in to what you have to say, but that might happen next month, you know?
Yeah, to add to that, I think it's absolutely true. I mean, it's kind of like dating, right? You kind of have to just start hanging out, trying to get an excuse. Maybe you can get 20 minutes of time, and then you just update them. So I have a whole bunch of people that I just update every month with our progress, and then they'll tell me, okay, that looks good, do this, and then we'll get you in front of, you know, they're just waiting for you to achieve certain things. Mm-hmm. and they get to trust you as you're reporting to them regularly. And yeah. I think that's really, really important.
I would like to add on to both of what you said, that it's really about building trust and also having a tactical approach and operationalizing. I'm kind of curious, in your experience in fundraising, about how you sort of operationalize the fundraise in terms of working with your connectors and advisors and advocates, and really putting a system in place so that you're removing all the no's in a way, preemptively, and then have everything that an investor might ask for in advance. So that data room kind of being ready if it's available, and having a CRM or something like that. But
yeah, I mean, so I'll answer it since I'm actively fundraising. We just we're sort of closing in little bits and pieces as we need it, because we're a low burn company. No one has salary. We just pay people, contractors. You know, for me, I think the most important thing is, sorry, I have to figure out what's going on at my front door. I apologize. I'll be right back.
I'll jump in.
Yeah, jump in. Sorry about that.
No, it's the operationalizing. So this is really the crux of the challenge, right? Because fundraising has never been codified or even represented as a skill set. It's this magical thing that some people just magically do. And if, you know, the reason I spent 3 years codifying fundraising as a skill set was because when I showed up in Oregon from Silicon Valley, and I started raising money for my next company and just did it because I knew how to do it. Founders who were from Oregon and in the cannabis industry started saying to me, how do you raise money? And I was like, geez, I don't know, you just do it. And I was like, oh, wow, that is a problem. That's a huge problem. And then there is no answer to that question online. There's no manual. There's no like, do this, do this. There's no methodology. And I think founders get taught to pitch and they get taught to sort of, you know, have a deck and they get taught to like build an executive summary, business plan, whatever. But what they really don't have is a methodology. So what I think is important is to operationalize everything except the relationship. Operationalize everything. And what that means is in any process that you design in your business, and as founders, you've all done this, what you're really trying to do is take friction out of getting from A to B. And so an example is most seed stage investors do not have a strong grasp on how to read financial models, okay? They won't say that to you because they're the smartest people, right? Because we have this culture that tells us that. But a lot of seed stage investors, they're not experts in your Excel financial model. They're not. So what you have to do is you have to think of the information pathway for them. Think of the questions they're not going to ask you because maybe they don't feel comfortable letting you know that they don't have certain areas of expertise, and just create an informational framework that's very easy for people to go down. And remember, people don't absorb information the same way. So don't stick everything into like a 30-page business plan, like break it out. Like nobody needs the market data in your executive summary. Like put a resources folder in your data box and put all of the sort of ancillary and third-party information in there. Have a financials folder, just your pro forma and historical financials. And for your pro forma, write a summary of your pro forma in words that says, we'll break even in month X of plan. We'll be cash flow positive in this month of plan. We expect to, we're our cost of acquisition. These are the assumptions that we've used to drive predictions in our model. Like just explain it. So just think of all the things that would maybe trip someone up as they're trying to make a decision about investment. You might not hear it from them that it's a challenge, but just try to create an informational framework that's really coherent and make sure that you have timelines and deadlines. Don't make them hard deadlines, and you always need a back door because you never want a failure in a raise. And the other number one thing you can do tactically is if you're raising a seed round and it's in the Bay Area and it's like 1.5 mil, or you're doing it in Oregon and it's like 500,000 or whatever it is, like you always have the opportunity. There's so much flexibility in this space. If you feel like there's going to be a challenge getting like the first $100,000 in on a $1.5 million raise, because we all want to feel like sharks and not minnows, right? So break it down. Start talking about the tranches, like break the raise down. So the first 100,000 in on your $500,000 tranche, that guy's going to just feel a little different about it than he is being like this little piddly guy in like a $1.5 million raise. Break it down, talk about it differently. It's the same raise. But if you tranche it, you can oversubscribe a tranche, and now you have this wonderful word in your vocabulary that you can use about yourself, oversubscribed. Understand the signals investors are looking for, and then operationalize everything except the sort of authenticity of the relationship that you need to create.
And there are tools like out there, like more on the actual operationalizing the funding itself. I run it like a sales process. So I use a CRM. I use Founder Suite, which is all right. It's not the best, but it does integrate with Crunchbase, so you can pull in the data on each. And then it just basically has a way for you to track the progress of each of the leads, put them into boxes of, do you want to, they're interested maybe for the second half of the raise, They said they're Series A only. And so I put that all into a CRM, and then I have 140 investors in there, and it captures all my email conversations so that I can jump right back in with any of them. And then if I need a little more money, I can figure out who to go back to. So that's one operational thing. The other, for me, it's extremely expensive, but I really like Carta. So Carta is a platform that just basically all of your legal documents, your cap table, everything gets organized. You can communicate to your investors, and investors love it because it makes diligence just so simple. Everything's just already there and organized for you. So, I think those are just two examples of tools that you can use, some kind of CRM like Founder Suite, and then something like Carta to get all the company docs organized and easy to share.
Right. Yeah. Thanks a lot for that discussion. That was really, really useful. We're going to change tack in a second, but before we do, just wanted to remind everyone that the chat section is for comments and resources. The Q&A section is for the questions you want to pose to the group. So on that note, Seth, have there been any comments that you'd like to add on the discussion so far?
Yeah, just briefly. So first of all, Jack Chen, you put a question in the chat. You might want to just pop that into the Q&A. But then briefly, and forgive me if I'm mispronouncing your name, Kaki Flynn, is making the point, picking up on something that Sara mentioned about growing where you're planted being valid, but then also making the point that as a lesbian in the Deep South, she's finding that it's a very different sort of environment for her to try to reach out to folks, whether she's not surrounded by, as she would say, being surrounded by 1,000 deep in lesbians, for example, in San Francisco, as the rest of us might be. And so the importance of an organization like StartOut being all the more important for someone like her.
I totally agree. I mean, I moved up to Oregon with absolutely no network. I was, at the time I was living with my girlfriend, I'm like a member of the queer community. I didn't know anyone in Oregon, not a single person. And my next job was to raise like a pretty significant amount of money to start this company. What I'd say is that communities don't have to be geographic. And one cool thing about being a member of a community that has been sort of marginalized in the way that the queer community has over the years is there's this profound devotion and like willingness to support. I mean, I do things for queer and POC founders for free that I wouldn't have somebody pay me to do as a consultant, because I feel compelled to support these companies. And I do think that there's an opportunity to sort of understand who your tribe in a broader context, especially now that we're all on digital communications all the time, and find opportunities to sort of replicate the same sort of philosophy, but within a broader construct for how you think about your community and who your people are.
Awesome. Thanks, Sara. So we're going to switch now to entrepreneurship briefly, and then we'll come back to some more general fundraising questions. And that's where we'll get to some of the questions that are coming through about targeting specific investors, because everyone has lots of unique business ideas they want to ask about, but we'll talk about in generalizations for this session, and feel free to join StartOut and seek the one-on-one advice from the experts separately. So Peter, these ones will mostly be for you, but Sara and Stefan, please feel free to chime in. So going right back to the beginning, what advice and tips do you have for aspiring entrepreneurs about when the right time is to start a business?
The right time to start a business is when there's a problem to solve. And I personally think that a crisis like this is potentially one of the best times to start a business. I started my second company in the wake of the dot-com crash. And at first that would sound like insanity, but I was getting Aeron chairs for $50 and servers for like 100, and because everything, it was a fire sale of equipment back when we had to rack our own servers, and talent was just so available. So sometimes a downturn can be an excellent time to to raise. And so, you know, the time is really depends on the business, and ultimately it all boils down to your customer. You shouldn't even be talking to VCs before you're talking to your customers and really understanding what they want, because sometimes a VC will have a thesis, and it might be a brilliant thesis, but if you really haven't done your research and really come up with what you want to do, they may shape you into their thesis, and that could end up being a godsend and a wonderful thing, or it could sort of end up dragging you in a direction you didn't really want to go. So, you know, if you get your customers, if the customers are everything, they define your product, they define your success. Everything happens because of your customers. And if you just focus on understanding their needs, the rest often follows. Not always, but it's better. You don't want to ask VCs before you ask customers, just like you don't want to ask your younger brother. It's not that they don't know, it's just that they might have a different opinion.
Yeah, and that's you've kind of alluded to the next questions there about, you know, what are the first steps, and how, you know, what do you do to start out? And I think talking to the customers and doing your research and having those discussions is obviously key. So once you go through that process, what's your process of determining whether or not you're on the right path and there is some substance to the idea that you might want to take forward, form a, you know, formal business company, start talking to, you know, angels and investors? How do I
do it? So I tried, first of all, I see if I can convince someone to become co-founder, right? And do it for equity. Because the first test is if someone's willing to work their ass off for no cash. And the second thing is, having done several companies without co-founders, I don't know what I was thinking. I have 2 co-founders now, and I realized I had 15 years of hell that's unnecessary. So, you know, my first step is to find the core people that you need to solve the problem. And that's the most important thing, because I'm sure Sara can add to this, but VCs, the team chemistry is so important, and the ability of the team to work together, respect each other, challenge each other. And, you know, I've seen companies, we had a great company in the second cohort of Startup Growth Lab, where they had a founder fight and the whole thing fell apart, and they were hot. This is a hot company with lots of interest. And then I've also heard of a kid, and like a 19-year-old kid who dazzled a VC who threw $2 million at him. And then after about 6 months, he said, this is not fun anymore. I got an offer from Google, so I'm leaving. Right. And so, you know, they want, the most important thing is to have that core team where you just have chemistry, you're having fun, you're challenging each other, because the investor is going to pick up on that. So it's actually a lot easier. In a sense, it's easier. It's about finding your partners and understanding your customer, and then the rest sort of comes, and then you'll have some help. You know, that's just one man's.
I got a great answer to this question just recently. I'm working with a founder, and just a total rock star, and she is developing a sort of scoring system. I think of it as like FICO for startups, right? It's really 100% centered on product market fit, which we all know is the biggest risk for investors. And I am, you know, I'm working with her on her capital raise. She's got like ridiculous traction. She's got like the DOJ is signed up, like she's got government contracts. She's got a lot of really incredible stuff going on, and accelerators, some big ones that you'll have heard of. And it's fascinating. And so I have the opportunity to sort of dig into her perspective on that. And I asked her yesterday, I'm like, so how do you define product market fit? And she said, I would never start a company that I couldn't sell the product before I made it. And what I said, well, really, the people, is that, I'm going to think about that. And she said, well, think about it this way. If you've developed such a compelling offering that if you've developed a product that your customers don't need it badly enough, that they're willing to sort of pre-purchase it with some understanding that they're going to wait a minute for it to show up, she said, then maybe you don't have as compelling a product as you think you do, or you're not really truly solving a critical problem for your customer. And while I wouldn't go so far as to say that all companies have to sell products before they deliver them, there is a case to be made for different ways that you might test and validate your product market fit using a strategy that finds some way to sort of monetize access to your product pre-delivery. And I just find that fascinating, and I'm actually pivoting into an interesting strategy in a company that I'm pulling together to try that out. And the other thing that investors, the second largest area of risk is execution track record. And that, as we said earlier, that doesn't have to come from your existing company. You can compile a pretty comprehensive narrative around execution track record from whatever you've done in the past. And it doesn't just have to be your, startup career. Like, to be honest with you, someone who ran the PTA for 10 years has probably just as good an execution track record of anyone doing anything out there ever, right? Because there's all kinds of things that people do in their lives that demonstrate that they are willing to stick in a process and continue to live it. And, we all know that the PTA is probably as tough as it gets. The third one is conflict. And the way to address conflict is to make sure that, I totally agree with Peter. Don't, if you're going it alone, really do consider a co-founder. But then the question is, how much equity do I give a co-founder? That's a tough conversation. And the reason there's so much conflict is people have a hard time addressing these conversations that feel so personal because they're about your value. There are models and tools that you can use to, and I've built these and I've seen other versions online. You need a neutral framework to have these conversations and make these decisions. And if you need support, having the conversation, those places, what I would do is seek out a neutral framework to make those additions, because a lot of the minute a company gets successful, that's when the resentments that sort of are sitting there, that's when they surface, and that's when they become a risk to investor. The investor's risk becomes greater the more successful you are in terms of founder conflict. So just make sure that you start off those co-founding relationships and those advisory relationships and everything else with appropriate allocations of equity based on some neutral framework for attributing value to what is being delivered, and separate the past from the future. Anything that's already been delivered, vested. Anything that's in the future, vesting. And what I'm saying is, even as a founder and with your co-founders, you should put yourself on a vesting schedule for your own equity for future value that you anticipate delivering to the company over a 5-year timeline, which is how long it really takes to build a company. So some founders, are resistant to that, but there's no stronger statement you can make to an investor regarding your own willingness to be held accountable for value creation than putting yourself on a vesting schedule as an employee for your earned equity over the future course.
Excellent. Yeah, thanks very much for that. I just wanted to give up on timing. We don't have much time left for the hour, but we will go slightly over because I think the discussion's been really good. There are some more questions coming in, so we may end up 10 minutes over, but I think that should be fine. So just to wrap up the entrepreneurship question, general questions, a question came through about just sort of where people who are, aspiring founders, what resources, Peter, do you rely on? Have you looked into, have you used in the past for that early stage, just getting the ideas going, getting the advice, other than startout.org? Are there any other resources you want to mention?
Yeah, well, if you're in the Bay Area and once COVID is conquered in a couple of years, there's just endless meetups and pitch contests. And, what I did when I first came out here, I came out here working in investment banking, and I was like, but I knew I didn't want to do that. So I just started showing up at everything I could find. I mean, there's all sorts of organizations, everything from business development groups to software engineers to founder things, pitch contests, VC conferences, and just immersing yourself in all of that. You get the language, you feel the energy, you meet other people who might be helpful. And you know, so in a COVID era, it's going to be trickier, but you know, I think people are coming up with these virtual types of, just like we're doing now. You know, the thing that's unfortunate about this is we can't see any of the wonderful 70 odd people out there watching, and they can't meet us and we can't meet them. And so that's going to be missing for a little while. But you know, that, as well as always talking to prior founders, always trying to build relationships with investors, like people, you know, maybe who are high net worth or people who have some startup investing, just to start to get used to the way they think, and just talk to them about your business and see what kind of questions they ask. You know, just immerse yourself. I would say take every meeting you possibly can get and just go to everything you possibly can attend, and shake as many hands as you can. Well, not anymore. I don't even know if we'll be shaking hands anymore. But, you know, that's, to me, how I got started, is because I came from, you know, working in a bank. I had no entrepreneurship.
Yeah, excellent. And perfect. Thanks for that, Peter. And just a comment on that. I mean, yeah, like the format of these webinars varies obviously on the size of the audience. So I'd encourage folks to also just keep an eye out on StartOut social channels and the website, because there are plenty of smaller events where there is that one-on-one interaction in the different form of Zoom meetings. So this one had to be a webinar because of the size of the audience, but we are breaking it out into smaller ones. So there's still some sort of access. And I know lots of other people are still doing that as well. So thanks for that. So I think we can end on the entrepreneurship section there. I'll throw to David to see what questions came through on the chat for that section.
Yeah, so, you know, on the entrepreneurship side, maybe this one leads into our conversation on fundraising. This one specifically asks, excuse me, I'm having trouble. How impactful is having a notable board of directors when raising a pre-seed round? For context, this company has revenue generating MVP and wants to do a small raise to rebuild their product. They're trying to assess whether or not to prioritize adding board members, and wanted your thoughts on that.
Nope. We're all shaking our heads.
Yeah. So unanimous.
So more valuable than board directors at that.
Yeah.
I would encourage you to reach out for the same kind of senior talent, but in an advisory capacity.
Exactly.
Don't make those people deal with your legal liability and your administrative consent signature.
Yeah.
Okay,
Awesome.
that sounds unanimous. So maybe we move into the financing section.
Sure. Yeah. So we're going to turn now to, in the time we've got left, probably 10 or 15 minutes, just having a more general discussion about fundraising. I might break it into three categories, seeing as we've got some limited time. So the first section is really about, you know, how, you know, you've come up with your business idea, you've perhaps found a co-founder, you've got a few advisory board members, you've spoken to your customers. What should you be focusing on to show, you know, those early stage investors, and how do you do it without any money? So chicken and egg, how do you prove to the investors what they want to see without having any money to do so, or having very limited money to do so?
I can start, because that's usually that, and credit cards are how everything gets started. So, you know, it's really, this is where selling skills come in. And, you know, having an MBA, the one thing they don't teach at MBA school is selling. They teach marketing, but they don't teach sales. And sales is everything, because you're always selling. You're selling to attract customers, you're selling to attract employees, you're selling to attract investors. And so basically, you've got to sell. I sell people to take equity instead of cash and get them to do things and deliver things without me spending money. And then, unfortunately, I'm a married man, so I can afford not to have an income from the company, and that reduces burn tremendously. Eventually I'd like an income from it, but I'm not going to take it now when we need to use that money on much more precious things. Yeah, I think there are ways. It's really hard. There is a classic chicken and an egg problem. But sometimes you'll find people who are interested enough in helping you to either be a contractor for equity or join your team. And you just, it's all sweat equity, right?
Yeah.
I was gonna add that really circles back to what you said earlier, Peter, about co-founders and bringing on people that it's sort of validating for yourself, but also signaling to other people that you're able to convince people to join for the sweat equity. They believe in the vision and what you're trying to do together, and that is a form of investment, right? And,
absolutely.
And I think that you touched on something else that I often share with my conversations with founders is that having a runway to start with where you don't need to take you can live off your savings, or you don't need to take an income for 12 to 6 months so you can achieve some real things, is one way of doing it. I know a lot of people aren't fortunate enough to do that, and that sort of circles back to what Sara said about one of the co-founders she's been working with about pre-selling the product. If you know that if people are knocking on your door or telling you, oh, I really want this, I would pay you for this now, then that's sort of solving that chicken and egg issue. And that also is a strong product market fit signal. No, you're not going down some rabbit hole of despair in terms of no market.
Yeah. And I'm sorry.
Those are sort of the things I wanted to tie in together about that.
Yeah. And just to like add some sort of tactical onto that, just, like I said, like throw out your notion of who you're looking for in terms of just investors, and throw out your notion of how you're defining investing. Like if you bring in a signal advisor into your company for equity, it's maybe going to cost you half a point of equity. They're really going to do it because they like you and not because they think they're going to get rich, but they will send a very strong signal to investors in your fundraise. Secondly, did you know you can use a convertible note or a safe agreement for an in-kind investment, no different to cash? So all of those marketing companies who are doing work and donating time and work to startups because they care about it would jump at the opportunity to continue just stop giving stuff away for free and have the opportunity to earn back the benefit of their participation by delivering services to you in a convertible note structure or a safe agreement structure that does not conflict with your existing raise. And you can approach service providers within your domain who are, marketing, PR. Now you're going to have to probably cover your own ad spend if you're going to be doing that. But for the soft costs, the non sort of hard costs for the providers, they're often doing this as a loss leader anyway. Right. And they will appreciate the opportunity for you to come to them with an offering for them to be in a convertible position, the same as all your other seed stage investors, in return for the delivery of their services. And it gives you a really strong basis to sort of proactively go out and ask for stuff that you've normally maybe been able to get lucky and benefit from a little bit of help for free. Now you get to be in a transactional relationship that treats this person like an investor and continue to make progress. You see this in technology MVP build-outs all the time. And I really encourage my founders to use this approach with marketing services also. And I've vetted a lot of marketing agencies who are doing this for free, and I have not had one single no that all of them are very, very positive on their level of interest in engaging with startups in this way. So, just understand that the world of finance and early stage capital is like, it's kind of make it up as you go along situation. The only rigid thing about it is, is these, these ancient documents that we use. But anything that's not illegal within that framework, you can do. So just familiarize yourself with those structures and some of the flexibility that you can apply to them.
Yeah, I think that's an amazing idea, and you know, you're going to be spending the money you raise for investors on those services anyway in the likely situation. So you that's incredible. I've actually never heard that in 3 years in Silicon Valley. So wow, that's
I know, funny, huh? And we're all about innovation, but apparently we're a bunch of dinosaurs when it comes to investment instruments.
Yeah. So the next area is about, you know, a lot of questions been coming through about ways, you know, to specifically target ideas for, you know, investors for specific ideas. But just talking in generalizations and generality, like, what are the tips for prospecting and targeting investors, you know, at the early stage?
Go ahead. It's a lot of work, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, it's a lot of work.
Yeah, I often say it's sort of like a second job on top of being the founder of a company, because there's a lot of due diligence in the way that you do. And that's one of the great things about having co-founder and advisors that are and advocates that are within your network that can really sort of decrease that burden in a way, make those connections and know who would be the right people to connect you with, because you can do all this work on researching what investors have said about the area of focus that they're in, the stage, the size of the checks they're doing. So looking at their websites, looking at Crunchbase or Twitter and Medium, and what the for example, at a VC fund or firm, what the general partners or managing partners or principals are writing about in terms of
Absolutely.
what they're excited about, what kind of companies they're literally looking for, like, or what annoys them about founders when they approach them. So it's really knowing your target audience and doing your research on them. They're going to do the research on you, and it's going to be also a long-term relationship. So you want to know that's you're finding the right people.
Yeah. I found that founders, especially founders who come from marginalized communities, because there's this inherent, because, you know, the problem with being outside of what I think of as an organic capital network, right? Like a group of people who have already figured out that they just happily like share money back and forth through referral. If you're not in that club, there are all these feelings associated with fundraising, because it feels like you're asking for something that you haven't grown up in the experience of being entitled to. And so, yes, you have to get on with the job of like evolving your experience of entitlement, because you are entitled and it's a meritocracy and you have just as much right as anybody else to that money. But what I've realized is that founders from those communities tend to not talk about the fact that they're raising money unless they are in a fundraising context. So what I learned, this is an aha moment, was I was fundraising for my company, driving along on the freeway, and I rear-ended the guy in the car in front of me when all the traffic cleared out. We got out to exchange information, and he's like, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, "I'm fine. I'm just a little bit distracted because I'm in the process of raising money for my company." He ended up being an investor in my company.
That's amazing.
Thing, guys. I've thought about this, and I teach this.
Always be closing.
Yes, always be closing.
Yeah, there's not a single conversation in the world that you can't insert the words "I'm fundraising for my company" into. Oh my goodness. I'm an idiot right now. I'm just so busy. I'm fundraising for my company. Oh, I'm just excited. Like, yo, you look great. Yeah, I'm just happy. I'm fundraising for my company. Like, whatever it is. The bottom line is seed investors, they're not they're people. You're just looking for people. Angel investors are people who happen to have a little bit of extra money. That is the definition. So you can meet them just about anywhere. And remember, we make reality TV shows about this. People are into it. They watch it as entertainment. People want to be a part of it. So what I would do is just spend like one day practicing inserting the words, "Oh my gosh, oh my goodness, I'm so blank. I'm in the process of raising money for my company," and see how quickly you build yourself an angel investor network. It'll blow your mind. Like, there isn't anyone you shouldn't tell. So don't be shy about telling people you're raising money, even if you're outside of what you would consider to be like a fundraising context.
Sarah, I have to build on that is such an important point, because I get asked a lot, about, well, I don't want to tell anyone my secret. It's a secret, and I don't want anyone to copy me and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, no one's going to copy you because nobody has the time. You're the only one with the passion. You know so much more about it than anybody else does. They're not even seeing the things that you're seeing. And a VC certainly doesn't have time to steal an idea from you. It's the opposite. You should be telling everyone what you're doing, because not just about the fundraising, but about finding potential co-founders. Once you start talking about what you're doing, you're just putting it out there, then you'd be amazed how many people will pipe up and say, oh, I know a guy who'd be perfect to get an intro. I know a guy over at, whatever, Amazon. I can totally hook you up. I mean, all of that happens because you're putting out your idea. And not only that, but when you're talking about your idea, you're getting feedback about the idea. And that's the beginning of understanding if there's a real product market fit potential, right? So you should always be talking about it, because no one's going to steal it. It's all about execution.
Yeah. I was about to, it's just about execution.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, it's and it can depend on cultural differences as well, where you are throughout the world. But people who want to copy a business will copy an established successful business and just try and do things and nail a bit of a niche market. They're not going to take an idea and build it up from scratch, because they're likely not going to have the same passion as you who came up with the idea, right? So, perfect. So, to round out the Q&A on this section, and it's obviously an important one for the audience. But what's your perspective on what is at the root of the severe funding gap that exists for underrepresented women, people of color, LGBTQ plus founders, and how do we go about as a community trying to effectively close that gap moving forward?
A lot of it's to do with network and what Sarah was saying earlier about not feeling like you have permission to talk about it in different situations, but or that you're entitled to the money. But I think and systemic issues that have kept people out of accumulating wealth in those communities. Things have slowly been changing.
Yeah, it's such a complicated problem. And, with StartOut Growth Lab, that was like one of the things we're really trying to do, is make sure we not just admitted LGBTQ, but if we could, people of color and women, to try and help, them build those networks. But, I'm a five-time founder with 4 exits. It still didn't matter. No one was going to fund me until I had product market fit. And that's just the way it is. I mean, yes, I did. I was funded pre-product market fit by exactly as I think both Sarah and Stefan have mentioned, which is, people and people who know you, who are willing to, and you've met either professionally or personally, who are interested in investing. They're going to be your first investors if you're lucky. More typically, it's family members and credit cards. But so I've gone through it with not for being gay, but for being 57 years old in a young person's world. And so it's a fascinating thing to really understand that question in the back of your head. Was it the idea, or was it me, or something? And, that's such a hard question, because I don't know. I feel like, and it varies from person to person. But I can tell you that, the essentials have to be there no matter what, right? I mean, if you come in with a hockey stick growth of some viral network effect product, people aren't going to care if you're an alien from Mars. They're going to throw money at you. And I think the challenge is probably as I think the preface of the question, at the earliest stages, which is when it is primarily about relationships and trust, and unfortunately for a lot of investors, pattern matching with things that they've seen before and are comfortable with. And even someone being a woman of color, unfortunately for some of some of the old guys in the Valley, that's just not a pattern they know how to match towards success, and it's horrible. It's about trying to really be aware of your implicit biases and trying to look back that. And then also, I think finding VCs who are actively trying to recruit women and people of color and others, disadvantaged groups, to focus on that. And more than ever, there are more VCs, I think, out there trying to do that, particularly newer funds, than I've seen certainly 10 years ago.
There are definitely funds out there that or investors, specifically investors at funds, that say their target are underrepresented founders, because they see that as an opportunity, that there's
absolutely
more upside, and people are doing more with less. So.
Right. And yet statistically, we have had no visible movement of the needle on that. And I think my answer to this question is a little bit different, and I, and sometimes not the most politically correct, but ultimately I really feel that as founders, I'm like a 50-year-old queer woman who's foreign, so that might actually be an advantage. But I gotta say, I've worked with maybe like 300 or 400 founders on fundraising. I would say that the LGBTQ sort of marginality is the least problematic in the sort of stack of being a woman. Put it this way, if I was going to stake my chances on my success just based on what I know I'm dealing with the outside world, I would support an African-American guy in a fundraising effort before I would support any woman, any color, anything, right? Because statistically, they're just more likely to get funded. But here's the thing, it's like, as founders, I believe, have to just stop sort of looking at the world and trying to change the world around us. Like, one, it's not that it's not a worthy effort, and it's not that it doesn't need changing, but you don't have the time for the world to change. The thing that we can do, and that we can own and control, is our own sense of our own value. And here's the truth that I've learned about fundraising. The way that you feel about fundraising, the way that you feel in that activity, the extent to which you experience anxiety or shame or feeling like you're asking for something, the way that you feel has a much more significant impact on your outcome than anything to do with your offering or the quality of the business that you've built. So what that tells me is what you've got to do is you've got to sort of, when you start thinking about doing a fundraising effort, you've got to start doing sort of an internal check. And I get some challenge on this. Oh, so it's our problem, we have to change. Well, no, but if you wanted to fly an airplane, you wouldn't expect to be able to do that because you want to be, because some other people can fly airplanes. You would expect to go through a process of educating yourself and nurturing and fostering the kind of skills and the kind of language and the kind of presentation capacity that you need to make to be successful in that task. And so what I say to founders is, let's figure out, like, if you have a number in your head for your valuation, whose number is it? Like, what do you think your company is worth? Like, how do you think much you're worth? The reason you don't send your information via email to investors is because why would you just put your information out into the world without any expectation of a reciprocal relationship? Are you showing up as a peer and a professional on a level playing field? The thing is that we have to learn entitlement because we have not had the opportunity. It has not been bestowed on us by our culture. And that is a process. But while you go through the process of learning your entitlement, the good news is you can operationalize entitlement. You can operationalize and create a process that signals entitlement. And it will more dramatically change your outcomes in fundraising than anything you can do to your company or your pitch deck or your network. You've got to feel like you deserve those funds. And we as sort of leaders or supporters of entrepreneurs, we have to understand that this is a whole person problem. It's access to capital is not the core problem. It's access to the sense of entitlement that in our culture is rewarded with capital. And that's the thing that I think that, that's the thing I focus on with founders, along with providing the education that makes you qualified to do the job of you know, managing equity, guarding equity, managing capital, being, you know, competent as a leader in a due diligence process, all of these sort of technical and tactical skills. So I think it's over to us. I think as founders, our first step is being like, ask yourself honestly, do you feel entitled? Do you feel like you're begging, or do you feel ashamed when you ask for money, or you think you have to ask for money? If the answer to that question is yes, then that's going to affect your outcomes. And that's the first thing that you need to tackle before you start. You know, I'm so over wailing at the venture capital machine, you know, so I think we can make the change. And here's the thing about signaling. When you signal to the world that you're someone who's entitled, weirdly enough, everyone else just code switches into a response to that. The fact that you're a woman or a person of color, it weirdly disappears. And as a woman fundraising, I can say this from personal experience. And so your projection of entitlement is going to be the thing that defines the conversation and the outcome. And hopefully that's not too preachy.
That was honestly the most interesting and best advice I've heard.
Thank you.
Ever. No, ever. Because I just had the insight that personally, I don't signal entitlement. You know, I mean, yeah, I've been successful raising money, but it's always hard. And I probably am making it much harder than because I don't know. I feel like modesty, you know, the Valley doesn't, it's such a, you know, you don't want to appear arrogant.
Crap. Everyone feels like crap in the Valley. You know,
I just don't, it's a fine line between arrogance and confidence. And I'm always afraid I'll appear arrogant and I end up appearing less entitled. And I think, you know, it's just very powerful advice. It's got me thinking miles an hour right now.
I mean, my definition for entitlement is internal value projected outwards as expectations. It's only an ugly thing when it isn't earned, when it's not deserved or earned, you know. But in and of itself,
we have a president that comes to mind.
Yeah, right. It's not pretty.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you very much for that. That was that was a great discussion. So seeing as we've gone over, and I think it has been a great, well worth the time. But we will just sort of wrap things up. I'll throw it to David on the Q&A for maybe one or two more questions on the fundraising side of things, and then we'll close it out.
Yeah, thank you. I think one question that's come up a few times is just around equity compensation, and in terms of how are you gauging that for advisory board members. So we're wondering if that being a general question, if you could speak to that, would be helpful.
I think Sara mentioned 0.5 point to a point, you know, because it's early stage, it's going to get diluted down. But yeah, my advisors are getting 0.6.
Yeah, if you want like a super rock star who you don't already know, it can't be under a point because the psychology doesn't work. Anything under a point feels like it's a nothing, right? Like if it's less than 1, it's just 0. And people's brains are weird about how they round numbers. So if it's really somebody you want, then it needs to be a point. And pre-capital, it's a point. After that, it goes down fast. It goes down, 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 down fast. But if you can take 2 points of your equity and go out and get 2 really amazing people added to your company, it's going to massively change the optics of your raise.
Absolutely.
Also, often that's over a vesting period. So they demonstrate their worth over some time, and then they start getting equity. So it's not, and plus, as both of you said, the dilution over time once you start raising. So it's not giving up a huge chunk of the company.
Yeah.
And also to the point of like, if they're really a rock star that really signaling something like that, those advisors are really adding a lot more value than just from the few hours of time that they're spending per week or whatever their arrangement is. But there are, there's definitely resources online for advisory agreements and understanding how to allocate capital, or sorry, not capital, equity.
Equity, yeah. I usually make them vest over 1 year, assuming I can get 1 year out of them. Sometimes two, it kind of depends.
Yeah, I have the same rule. And I also treat it like an employment agreement with a fairly specific scope of work, not like in hard deliverables, but in sort of expectations as to the type of value that an advisor is going to be delivering, and establish a structured framework for communications. So are you going to have an advisory board meeting with all your advisors, and then sort of in-person check-ins with an advisor? Like, just make sure that you treat it like a role and with responsibilities in the same way that you would an employee.
Great, very helpful. And maybe one last question in terms of closing the loop on financing. You know, you mentioned going out and having your pitch ready for the informal conversations in person about raising, but in the event you do have to have a cold call or cold introduction, what's the best way to go about doing that? Is that an email with maybe a flyer poster enclosed instead of sending a traditional pitch deck?
I never send a pitch deck in any first communication. Sarah's made that point, and I believe it too. You want to hold that back, because if you give them everything they need, then they'll read it. They'll make a misinformed decision based on a quick skim, not having it explained and none of the nuance explained. And it's just a bad. And the problem is many of them will ask for it, and it's really hard to say no when they ask for it. But in that kind of impromptu thing, to me, the best scenario of all is you have that impromptu opportunity, and then once we're back to normal, you just grab a coffee for 20 minutes with the guy and just tell him what you're doing. You don't need a deck. You're just going to talk to him. You just and in a sense, I think to Sarah's point about entitlement, there's something about a deck that's disempowering. And if one of you is sort of the deck presenting, you're no longer the peer kind of relationship that Sarah's been talking about. So I think, and I have had VCs tell me to just put down your deck, just talk to me, right? So, I don't think the deck is the holy grail.
Yeah, a deck is like a point from which to have a deeper conversation, but you're never going to get an investment just from a deck.
Exactly.
And if you do get a meeting with an investor and they've seen the deck, then there are going to be a lot more questions. And you're never going to present uninterrupted a pitch deck. It's more, I see it more as something that you can use to help develop your narrative and understanding and how to frame it for investors, or like frame a conversation around it for investors, but not as presenting.
Yeah,
Right.
I think decks are better learning tools for founders than they are presentation tools for investors.
Putting them together.
Exactly. Build one and make sure it's really great, and then just put it in your investor folder and never use it again, because
exactly
because they suck, basically. And I don't want a presentation. I want a conversation, and I want a relationship with a company that I'm interested in investing in. So
yeah, God, and you can just fuss and fuss and fuss over your deck, thinking that if I just get my deck right, it'll be
we could
easy.
rebuild the global economy with all the hours that went into building
decks. It's crazy. I think they're becoming less and less important. And even now you're seeing some of the platforms are moving more towards video, where the founders do a little video pitch, and they want to get to know you. And they can't get to know you through a deck.
That's been effective. I had a founder do that, and it took me by surprise. She did a cold outreach to someone who she wanted to work with as a sort of advisor, a very senior talent. And she made a little video, and she just stuck it into the email, and she got a response from that person. And I was like, oh yeah, I mean, I think that you get to sort of experiment, be creative about this. Like, to some degree, it is sales, it is marketing. You can be colorful and creative, and if you have any, I would say if you have any knowledge or experience in generating really great, fun content, use that in the way that you reach out to people. You're basically just trying to get someone's attention.
Yeah.
I wish I had a really great sense of humor, because like, it's just so much easier.
Yeah, and I think it all comes down to rapport and building rapport, right? When you're doing this outreach, you know, people use the dating analogy. You know, you don't come along and tell your first date your entire life story and present it in a deck. You know, you trip it in, tease people, and come up with inventive ways to capture that attention, especially now more than ever in the situation that we're in, obviously. So Seth, just finally, any final comments you wanted to add in that's come through on the discussion?
Yeah,
channel?
just a few things. So in addition to a hello from Nairobi, which is kind of cool, a lot of people basically agreeing with Sarah's earlier comments. And one person saying mindset is so important, especially for marginalized groups. So a lot of concurrent there. And then Zach Ager said that JC Calcanis runs a program dedicated to underrepresented founders. So that might be worth looking into as well.
Awesome. All right, so given we've gone half hour over, we have to draw a line somewhere. So apologies to everyone whose questions we didn't get to, but I would just again emphasize that you can head along to startout.org, join the community, and access the mentors and experts like those we've had on the call, and ask your specific questions in those forums. So, and also the StartOut forum, where you can get advice from the community in general. So use all of those tools to your advantage, and stay tuned to StartOut social channels. We have another Ask Me Anything event coming up next Wednesday at the same time, which is going to focus on marketing and storytelling and public relations PR. So feel free to join for that one as well. You probably received an email if you signed up. There'll probably be another circular going around. So look out for that one. And we look forward to seeing some of you on that call as well. And finally, thank you very much, Sara, Peter, and Stefan, for your time this evening and your generosity. It's been a great discussion, and I'm sure the community got a lot out of it, and the recordings will be made available shortly. So thank you very much for your time, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, it's great.
Really fun.
Yeah, it was my pleasure.
Yeah, hopefully I get to meet Stefan and Sara in person someday and give you both hugs.
We can only hope.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. This is fantastic.
Everyone. Good night, everyone. Enjoy your evening.
Bye.
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 Amazing job, guys. Great.
Thanks, Sara.
Hey, David, are we good?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Thanks. Bye.